Alright guys, welcome to creating an FPS weapon management system in Godot 4. This is the second episode in this tutorial series. The first one is setting up the FPS camera that I posted a few months ago now, but these next ones are coming out week to week. So remember to like and subscribe if you want to keep up with when those come out. In this tutorial, we are going to be going over setting up the animations for our FPS weapon management system, creating a resource that we can use on all of our weapons, and lastly, setting up our weapon manager, which is a state machine that will control what is the current weapon and when to switch, all that good stuff and more coming up. If you created your animations already, then you can go ahead and skip this first part. I'll have timestamps down there if you want to skip ahead, but first let's get into creating the animations. The first thing that I'm actually going to do is just add an environment to the scene because it looks pretty boring in the last tutorial. So I'm going to click these three little dots and just click add environment to scene. It's just an overcast looking kind of environment, nothing too special, but it will just make things look a little bit nicer while we're here. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is just click this character body 3D and save branch as scene. I'm going to save that in the tutorial folder and I'm just going to call it something like FPS character probably. Okay, so now I've done that, I'm going to open that scene and we're going to reset the transforms since we set this up in another scene. So things are a bit wonky here, so I'll just click the character and come down to transform. Just click this little round refresh looking button. And there we go. Okay, so I'm going to rename this as well, something like FPS character, the same as the scene name. Nice and easy. And I'll just come back over into the world and I'll probably delete this because, I don't know, it doesn't rename it for you and I don't like that. So just drop this in and I'll just move it back over to roughly where it was. Make sure it's in the scene. Okay. Now we can jump back over here and start workings. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just split the view in two so that we can start setting up our animations. I'm going to come down to this bottom one and I'm going to click preview on the camera so that when we're doing our animations we can see what we're doing. I'm going to add a node here. We want to look for a node 3D, just a plain old node 3D. And I'm just going to rename that to weapons underscore manager. We'll add another child to that, it'll be another node 3D, and I'll probably just call this FPS underscore rig. This is where we'll put the actual weapon models and animate them. So I've got some models from Kenny. He's got all the good stuff, so I'll link his website down below. If you need some, you can just drag some in. Doesn't really matter for this demonstration. I'll look for a pistol and sort of like an automatic rifle as well. And one other one just for good measure as well. This one will do. All right, so they're just sitting right in the middle of our scene. So we'll just want to select them all and just push them down to the feet where they're out of view of the camera. And now we need to add an animation player. So I'll hit add node again and click on animation player. So blaster and activate is the first one. I'm going to key in the position they're at now as the starting position of the activate. And I'm going to make them all invisible as well. And toggle that visibility on as I start to key in this animation. And I'll just bring that up to where I think it should be and key that in. Cool, I'll make it a bit shorter. Looks all right. Sometimes you've just got to play around with these till you get something that you like. I want it to be a bit quicker, but I noticed that it was spinning around like crazy, so I just had to fiddle around with the exact point. And I kind of liked the spin into view, so I ended up putting that back in after I fixed it. So the key thing to remember here is that your starting frames for the deactivate should be the same as the ending frames for the activate animation. So I'll just key them in and then I'll just push everything back to where it was. As long as it's out of sight and not visible on the model, then you should be good. We don't want to drawing a shadow when it's not active, so just make sure to click that visibility off as it descends and we'll key that in. Just check out your animations as you go, just make sure you're happy with them. Okay, so on to the next shoot, probably the most important animation that you're going to do. So just make sure you pay attention to everything. I think it's best as if the gun moves backwards first and then rotates upwards. Just looks a little bit more believable. So I'll just key these in and things will start to look pretty good. And you really don't need as much time as you think you do, even for a longer shoot animation. 0.2 seconds is quite a long time. And The other key thing to remember is I'm going to be using the animation player as a way of regulating our fire rate. Other people will do this differently, and that's fine, but make sure that you're setting your track length to be the same as the ending point of your animation. You don't want any lingering time unless, of course, you do, but just make sure that you're cognizant of the fact that the track time, which is up in the top right-hand corner, is the same as what you want the fire rate to be. I feel like it's mandatory in every single indie game where there's no actual rig, there's just floating guns. You have to spin the weapon in order to reload. If you don't do this, then you're not a true indie FPS developer. So that's what we'll do here. Okay, so the next one is the out of ammo. This is what's going to play when the gun runs out of ammo and they can't reload anymore. We're just going to make it rock back and forth. Just nice and simple so they can see that it's actually not firing. I'm not going to put any sound in this. I think in a previous tutorial for Godot 3.5 I added sound and particle effects. We're not going that in depth, so I'm just going to make this shake just so it's nice and visually clear that we're not reloading. Okay, so those are the 5 animations I want for each of my guns. I'm just going to blast through now and set this up on the next 2 weapons. I'm going to speed this up so you don't have to watch me, and I'll see you when we are setting up the resource to manage all of this. Okay, so that's all set up now. I'm going to close off all these folders so it's a little bit more readable, and I will create a resource. So I'm going to right click here and I'm going to add a script. So I'm going to come down to new and script. We're not going to add this to any nodes, so that's how we're going to have to do it. Well, I'm going to call this one weapon underscore resource. And where it says extends node, I'm going to delete that and replace it with resource. And class underscore name so that we can find it easy. I'm going to call mine weapons resource, and I'm spelling it wrong, so I'm going to come back here and correct that. Okay, so let's add a couple of variables. In fact, a resource is generally just a lot of export variables, and it can hold functions, but ours are just going to be variables. So the first one is obviously the weapon name as a string, and the list of the 5 animations that we set up. So I'm just going to call them the name of the animation underscore anim. Feel free to either copy that or do your own thing. I don't really feel like writing animation out. It's a lot of letters. So reload underscore anim, and these are all strings, by the way. So we'll do the export here, not change. Make sure that you try to make these as close to what you actually named your animations as possible. Otherwise, things can get a little bit confusing when you do have a lot of animations going. Obviously, there are arguments for using different ways of keeping track of all this data. You could use a JSON file, you could use a CSV file. Depends on how many weapons are in your game and the number of different actions that are available. So we're keeping this simple with the resource. It's nice and easy to set up that way. The other set of variables that we need are obviously the ammo. The current ammo is the amount that you can shoot. The reserve ammo is the amount that you can reload from, and I like to call it magazine. This is the amount that you can reload when you press the reload button, the maximum amount you can. And the max ammo is the maximum amount that you can have in reserve. Okay, so, and I'll also just add an auto fire variable as well, auto underscore fire as a Boolean. Okay, those are all the variables that we need right now. We're going to add to this as we go along, but this will do for now. I'm also going to come down and create a folder called Weapon Resources. And in that folder, I'm just going to right click, new resource, come down and look for weapon resource in the list. Weapon resource. So you'll see I've got an old one there. That's because I've been working on this a couple times. Okay, so I'm just going to name these the exact same as the actual weapon models, just so that I know what they are, nice and easy to keep track of. And you'll see we've got our first setup here. We've all got these variables up here. I'm just going to type them in, the name of the weapon, blaster N, I'll copy that and I'll just come down. Now the most important thing is when you're putting in these animations, make sure that they absolutely match the name of the animation. I almost put an underscore in there. I don't need it, there's a space. So they have to match exactly your animations. If you're having trouble with this later on and the animations aren't playing, it could be because there's a name wrong. You'll get an error in the debugger, but it won't actually crash the game. So double check that if you're having problems. And then just set up your weapon for the ammo that you want, making sure that I've got all my animations checked. And so yeah, just, whatever weapon you're making, set the current ammo, the reserve ammo, the magazine. I said before, that's the maximum amount you can reload, and the max ammo is the amount that you can hold in reserve, the maximum amount you can hold in reserve. So those are the variable names that I'm using. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm going to go through and create the rest of these resources. I'll speed through this section so you guys don't have to watch me just make these. Okay, now that we have them, we can start actually setting up our weapon manager. This is where the magic happens, all right? So we'll add a script to the weapons manager. It can be called weapons manager, that's fine. It extends node 3D, that is absolutely fine as well. Okay, so we need a few variables to make this work. The first thing we want to do is get our animation player. So I'll right click access to unique name on animation player, and I'll hit that at onReady var animation underscore player, and I'll write get underscore node and quotation marks, and then just drag the node over to that. And the next variable we need is the current weapon. This is the variable that we're making all the calls on. And the next variable will be the weapon stack, which is just going to be an array of all the weapons that we currently have available to us in the game. So if you pick up a weapon, it gets put in the stack. Okay, so we've got weapon indicator. That's just going to be a variable to keep track of the array. Next, we've got next weapon, which will be a string that we hold when we're changing weapons. All right, so now we've got weapon list, which is going to be a dictionary that we can use to keep track of all the weapons available in the entire game, even if we're not holding them. And we're going to have an export variable as well, which will be the resources. I'm just going to name mine underscore weapon resources, and it's going to be an array. And this is the trick: square brackets, and then type weapon resource in there, and it'll just allow us to drag those weapon resources into the array, which is nice and convenient. And then export variable start weapons, which is just going to be an array of all the weapons that are available at the start of the game or when you load it up. Okay, so here we can start setting it up. I'll add 3 items to the array and just drag these resources over. You can just drop them in, doesn't really matter the order. Okay, and then we'll come back up and I'll click on that again, and I'll add 2 starting weapons. I won't do all 3 because I'll save one to show how to pick up a weapon in a later tutorial. But right now I want to show you guys how to change weapons. So we'll start with that. I'll add in Blaster D and Blaster N, I think. Okay, so just make sure that everything's lined up and you're happy with it, and we'll start setting up the rest of the script. All right, so we're going to need a couple of functions. I'm going to type these out now. First, we want initialize, and then we're going to need an enter, and I'm just going to write pass, and we'll explain these in a second. Next, we're going to need change underscore weapon, which will be the main one to change weapons, and an exit as well. And that'll be when we're exiting the weapon. And I think I'll just put change weapon at the bottom of this script. Okay. We're going to need a ready as well. And we're just going to call initialize. It'll be the first thing we call. It's how we enter in to our state machine, because that's essentially what this is. A state machine which controls the current weapon state that we're in. Okay, so the exit is going to be what we call before we change weapons, to sort of validate that we're not in the middle of something else or whatever it is, anything that you need to validate. And enter is going to be what we call when we enter into the next weapon. So we can, play the right animation, we can reset some variables if we need to, update the ammo in the HUD or whatever it is. All right, so for our initialize, we are going to want to pass in the starting weapons. And obviously it's going to error out under the ready. That's going to be an array. We'll pass in the export variable start weapons, and we can get started. So the first thing that we want to do is actually create our dictionary list of all the weapons that are in the game. So to quickly explain, the weapon resources array that we have set up above isn't really going to be used except to build this dictionary. We could just have a dictionary and skip the array altogether, but we want to loop through for weapon in weapon resources, weapon list, and then we'll go brackets weapon dot weapon underscore name, and we'll set that equal to the weapon. Okay, and that'll create our dictionary so that as we're going through this, we can refer to it. Okay, the next thing we want to do is just loop through our start weapons. So for I in start weapons, weapon underscore stack dot pushback I. So we're just going to push all the start weapons into our array. So our weapon stack is just going to be a string reference to each weapon that we can, call up with that dictionary. Alrighty. So we want to set the current weapon equal to the weapons list, square brackets, weapon stack, square brackets 0. So that'll just be the first weapon in the stack. This is going to be the very first weapon that we pull up. And then I'm going to call enter. Okay, so there's not a lot for us to do right now when we call enter. All I can really think to do is just play that first animation. So I'm going to call the animation player.queue, and I'm just going to pass in current weapon.activate anim. And once again, just a reminder to make sure that you've got the variable name right, and you've also got the animation name right. Because I found with this way of referring to things, it's not going to, pre-fill in the variables or anything like that. So it's not going to tell you it's wrong until you run the game. So I'm going to run the game here, and I can tell that I've got it right because the weapon has shown up and is playing. Okay, let's move on. And we actually, in order to change weapons, we're going to need to set up some inputs. So I'm going to come up to the project settings, and I'm going to add some actions here. So we're going to call it weapon underscore up, and we're going to add that, and I'll weapon underscore down. And I'm going to make these up and down on my keyboard just because my mouse is a little bit broken at the moment. Okay, so, and I'm also going to add shoot and reload. I'm going to set them shoot to left mouse button, and I'll come back up here and I'll add reload as well. And I'll set that to R. Okay, so now that we've got that, we can add the input function to our script. So I'll come up below the ready, and I'll just enter down a bit, and I'll type func underscore input event, and we can do a check if event.isActionPressed weapon up, and we'll just pull up our weapon indicator and we'll increment that. I'm going to use the min function, so I'll choose between the smaller of the two, weapon indicator +1, or the weapon stack.size -1. So we don't want to go greater than the length of the array. That's why I'm doing it this way. And then I'll just call exit. And I'll need to pass in the weapon stack, square brackets, weapon indicator. Okay. And we're going to get a bit of an error here because exit doesn't have a variable, too many arguments. So make sure to come down here where it says exit and just add underscore next weapon, and we'll say that that's a string so we don't make any mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to add the exact same thing for weapon down. So if event.isActionPressed weapon down, I'm going to set weapon indicator, and this time I'm going to use max. So it's either going to be weapon indicator -1 or 0. So we can't go below 0. And then I'll call exit again, and I'll pass in the exact same thing. So I'm just going to copy this above and paste that in. Okay, so now in our exit, we can start working on this. So I'll just delete the pass, and I'll check if next weapon is not equal to current weapon dot weapon underscore name. We want to make sure that we're not changing into the same weapon. If animation player dot get current animation is not equal to current weapon dot deactivate. You can run any other checks here. This is what the exit function is for. Any kind of check that you want to make sure that you can actually change weapons. So I'm going to check that the animation player isn't already playing. the current weapon.deactivate, and I'll play, if that's all true, I'll play the deactivate animation, and I'll set the next weapon equal to the underscore next weapon, which is what we passed into the function. Okay, so how do we actually change weapons? Well, we're going to use a signal from our animation player. I find this is a good way to just control the rhythm of things and make sure that we're not spamming animations. So animation finished is the name of the signal that we want to connect. It's the second one down here. So just double click that and then click on Weapons Manager, and it's going to have a variable anim name. So we want to take that variable and we want to check if it is equal to current weapon.deactivate anim. So I'm just going to type this out now. If anim name is equal to current weapon.deactivate underscore anim, then, oh, got an L. Okay, so semicolon or colon, change weapon, and we're going to pass in a string. I'm just going to type this in here, weapon name, capital letter string, and in change weapon, we'll pass in next weapon. Of course, you could easily access that from change weapon, but I just feel like this is a little bit safer. Now, in theory, we've done all our verification already, so we know we can change into this weapon. So change weapon can just be nice and simple. I'm going to remove the pass here, and current weapon is equal to weapon list, square bracket, weapon underscore name. And that'll be it. And obviously we'll clear out next weapon so that it's blank, so we don't have any problems there. And we'll call the enter function and we'll go around to the next one. Now that we've got that all set up, we can run and do a test. And as you can see, when I press the 1 or 2 button, I swap weapons. Now, I shouldn't be able to swap weapons when I spam the 2 button. If I'm trying to continuously go up, it should just call up the same exact variable for weapon indicator, and then obviously we're the same, so it wouldn't work. So that's how you do it. Alrighty guys, I hope you found that helpful. That is the first lesson of around about 10 that I'm planning on this weekly series on creating an FPS weapon management system. This is going to be a complete tutorial series where we take you from setting up the weapon resources and the state machine all the way to having a complete FPS weapon system. So if you found this one helpful, remember to hit like and please subscribe. It is incredibly helpful. And also as a reminder, if you don't want to wait for the next video in this series, you can always sign up to my Patreon, patreon.com/Chaff Games, and you can have access to the first 5 episodes immediately, with the next 5 coming up pretty soon. Anyway, until next week, I'm Isaac from Chaff Games. I'll see you next time.